Now what will it be? Death or exile?
Voila! In view, a humble vaudevillian veteran cast vicariously as both victim and villain by the vicissitudes of fate. This visage, no mere veneer of vanity, is a vestige of the vox populi, now vacant, vanished. However, this valorous visitation of a bygone vexation stands vivified and has vowed to vanquish these venal and virulent vermin, vanguarding vice and vouchsafing the violently vicious and voracious violation of volition. The only verdict is vengeance, a vendetta held as a votive, not in vain, of the value and veracity of such shall one day vindicate the vigilant and the virtuous. Verily, this vichoise of verbiage veers most verbose, so let me simply add that it is my very good honor to meet you, and you may call me V.
Are you like a crazy person?
Welcome, everybody. This is our review of V for Vendetta. I'm very happy to be joined by my friends Adrienne.
Hello.
And Lupe.
Hello, everyone.
And we are reviewing this film in view that it is the 5th of November. Remember the 5th of November, gunpowder treason and plot. We see no reason why the gunpowder treason or this film should ever be forgot. So we watched V for Vendetta and we have a lot to say about the film. For those who haven't seen it, this will be spoiler-filled. It has been out for a long time. But for anyone who hasn't seen it, this is an adaptation of Alan Moore and David Lloyd's graphic novel, V for Vendetta. It's a dystopian political thriller directed by James McTeague, and the screenplay is written by the Wachowskis. It was their first foray into their post-Matrix careers. The film's set in the UK in the year 2020, and it is deemed to be like an alternative future. However, it scarily resembles our own present coming into what could possibly be our own future. We're going to look into themes of politics, religion, and literature. So this is going to be an all-encompassing review of this film. The film is about an anarchist, V, who is portrayed by Hugo Weaving, and he's trying to overthrow a fascist tyrannical regime. He takes an interest in a new apprentice, Evie, starred by Natalie Portman. So let's go into our thoughts on casting. Lupe, what were your feelings on the cast and how they performed?
I'm a huge fan of the Matrix films. If you know, that's like my number one franchise of all time. And this is the Bible truth. If you look in the book of Revelations, it's in there. So obviously by proxy, a fan of the Wachowskis. And so at the time I watched this film, to me, they could do no wrong. And the casting supports all my notions, all my faith in them. Hugo Weaving is absolutely fantastic. Brilliant. He brings a very theatrical and whimsical performance to V, and he carries himself like a performance artist. His dialogue is very lyrical. His actions are very, as I said, whimsical and romantic. And I think it's very powerful that he doesn't show his face the entire film, yet he's able to deliver all the emotion that you expect of a multi-dimensional character.
Yeah, and it's crazy to see such an incredible performance behind a mask. So a mask that never changes. And there's actually one scene where V and Evie are talking, and the face never changes because it's a mask that doesn't change. But when V is telling about his history and he says, what they did to me was monstrous. And Evie's reply was, and they created a monster. You can almost see, just by a head tilt, a completely different side of the character's face, even though the face doesn't change. It's very difficult to describe, but when you see it, it's incredible. Adrienne, what did you think about Hugo Weaving's performance as V?
Yeah, it was stunning. It was masterful. It's the only thing I could think of to describe it. It was just so commanding. I think you just sort of sit there riveted and just fixed on his every word. So I thought that was incredible.
Yeah, just to add one more thing, it's really cool because actors talk about using the entire body as an instrument, and here he didn't have his face to rely on.
His most important instrument.
Exactly. So he ended up using his body, like movements that he said, tilting his head, clenching his fist, raising his arms, shoulder movements. He used his entire body.
The other protagonist of the film is Evie, who is portrayed by Natalie Portman. This film came out in 2005, and this is pre-Academy Award-winning Portman. This is the time period where she had Star Wars prequels, and there's actually some similarities to her performance there, but particularly the accent and the her delivery of lines. I thought was very similar to Senator Amidala, Padme, and I think that her accent as a Brit, I can tell that it's an American putting on a British accent. The accent wasn't terrible. It's not great, but it's not terrible. It's more on the use of dialect that and the delivery of certain lines where it kind of sticks out a little bit more. But I think overall, if you take away the voice and the accent, I think her performance was really quite powerful, particularly in a scene that we're going to discuss later in more depth, where she's looking up at she's on the roof, the rain is falling on her. She says, God is in the rain. And there's loads of examples of her incredible performance from my perspective. Adrienne, what did you think of Natalie Portman's performance?
Yeah, I think early in the beginning, I wasn't quite buying into Evie as a character. And so I was like, oh, I don't know if this is Natalie's best work. But then when you hit the really emotional scenes and the ones with a lot of fear, I was like, okay, this is why this is Natalie Portman. So then I thought back later that I'm not sure how much of a personality Evie has or is supposed to have in the story. So I don't know if maybe some of what seems more blank to me in the beginning is kind of intentional. And so I'm still thinking about that. But when she hit all the emotion and the fear and all that, I then I was able to appreciate the performance.
Lupe, what about you?
Yeah, I don't have anything more to add. I'll just agree wholeheartedly. I felt like her performance was a bit uneven. Parts where she was supposed to do like the really heavy emotional stuff, the tear-jerking stuff, the stuff that's supposed to, rouse, your inner feelings, she did excellently well. And then the more mundane stuff, I really wasn't buying, felt a bit wooden. So it was quite interesting. But overall, I did like her because the most important parts of the performance are the parts where you're supposed to feel strong emotions, and she over-delivered those parts.
Excellent. Were there any other performances that you that you would like to talk about? There's actually an all-star cast in this film. I mean, you've got Stephen Fry, Stephen Ray, you've got John Hurt, the great John Hurt. What did you think of his performance as the Chancellor, the leader of this new regime, Lupe?
I thought it was brilliant. It seemed like he was scarily channeling his inner Hitler, which is
his name is Sutler,
because his name is Sutler, and all the sort of Nazi imagery that that fascist party had in the film. I think he did a brilliant job. I was both terrified of him, but then when he got captured and you could see him as a weak man, I felt that emptiness inside of him, and I thought he delivered very well.
Adrienne, how about you? Are there any other performances that you felt stood out, or how about the Chancellor's performance?
Well, about the Chancellor, he was the one on the big screen most of the time, right?
Correct.
Okay. Oh, and for that, I kept wondering, like he never blinks, and then his eyes were severely dilated, and I didn't know if that was intentional and why.
It was very imposing, and having him on the big screen was quite an interesting choice, because he was on the screen for virtually all the film. Even on he acted the part out of the mocking of him on Stephen Fry's show, and he did that really well as well. But even that was on a screen. You only really see him in his flesh form on the final act.
So yeah, well, they succeeded, and I didn't like any of them.
I would like to add both of the actresses that played Valerie. I thought that was the heart of the film, really. The story of Valerie, what she went through, and to find out that she was real at the end of it was really the tipping point. That was the part of the film where we realized who V is through her, and her performance. You see it from the younger actress, but then through the adult actress, a beautiful woman, an actress, falling in love, and then you see her being put into this facility, and then she had the hair shaved as well. She had deformities on her skin. The emotion coming through her was very powerful for me, so I like to mention her as well.
What about the actress that played, was it the other doctor, Diana?
Oh yes, the doctor that he killed with the lethal injection.
Right, I thought that was
acted by Sinead Cusack, and Delia Surridge was the character's name.
Yeah, I thought that her performance was really great. I really had I felt for her.
When we were watching it, I mentioned to Lupe that this is one of my favorite scenes in the whole film. You get remorse, you get mercy, you get lack of mercy, you get regret, you get so many things, and also some philosophy, right? So she talks about the atomic bomb and the creator of the atomic bomb, Oppenheimer, and how he probably didn't think he would change the world. He thought he was just stopping the war, but he changed the world forever. So there's a lot of philosophy in that scene, and it's a beautifully shot scene. Should we move on to scenes? Particular favorite scenes? So that's mine.
Any V monologue. I think.
So the opening act where he saves Evie, was that high up for you?
Yes, absolutely. I thought it was very grand.
Mine probably be a popular choice, but it's when Evie is interrogated and imprisoned and tortured, and the whole sequence from her incarceration to when she bathes in the rain. That just grips me. It's so perfectly edited. The storytelling is absolutely brilliant with how they shuttle in between the lives of the writer of the letter that she discovers and her process of pain and torture in the prison, and then the way the music builds and the tension builds up to that cathartic climax. It's like a little movie in itself. And I love it when films do that. Zack Snyder is known to do that a lot, where you have these very powerful sequences within films that have their own narrative arc and, you know, tell their own story that complement the overall story. I just thought it was masterfully done, to be sincere.
And what you say about it being reminiscent of the way Zack Snyder shoots as well, there is, I mean, it should be no surprise because Alan Moore wrote both V for Vendetta and Watchmen. While there were different artists on those books, Watchmen is by Dave Gibbons and V for Vendetta is by David Lloyd. However, the fact that they both have this distinctive Alan Moore feel, I think the directors of both films, Zack Snyder and James McTeague, did a brilliant job in terms of bringing those graphic novels to life. I think we should also shout out the cinematographer. Some of the cinematography in this film was stunning. Particularly for me was a scene where Evie was being broken down by V. She was in the prison cell, and a lot of those scenes were shot from directly above. It gave the sense of a completely broken individual on the floor, destroyed, and you're seeing her from a higher vantage point of an outside observer, just seeing how pathetic and destroyed she was. I think Adrienne Biddle did an incredible job throughout the whole film. Are there any particular parts of the cinematography that impressed you or that you felt were powerful in terms of the visual storytelling of the film, Lupe?
I think all through the film, from beginning to end, I really like the color grading. I like the lighting. I like the noir sensibilities. It's very dark, very shadowy. And that goes with the themes of the film. You have, you know, two opposing forces, light and dark, and you have characters that are trapped in between. And also, I was really pleased with the contrast between Evie and her outstretched arms when she was bathed in the rain, and V when he was in the burning flames with his arms outstretched.
Adrienne, was there any part of the cinematography that you felt spoke to you, that you enjoyed as part of the visual storytelling of the film?
Yeah, I'll have to watch it again for specifics, I think, but just overall, I'll just echo what Lupe said about the color grading. Like from start to finish, it feels like one thing. It feels like it's its own painting, it's its own art. It has its own style, like, and all that came together. That was never broken.
Yeah, definitely. I'll add one final thing on the in the final act. There's a bit where V is throwing or he's playing with the knives, and the visual effects in that are not in line with the rest of the film. You see the blades moving, and then there's like trails of where the blade was. I think it's stunning. It really kind of brought this extra dimension to this final kamikaze suicide mission that V was on, because it was all slowed down a bit to let us see how he was going to reach his victim. But he fights through all of these people, and the way it's done is visually stunning. And because it is so different from the rest of the film, it stands out more, and I really appreciate that little bit.
What I'll add to that is that it's very reminiscent of comic book art. When you see, characters move, use blades, or even gunshots, like you see that trail behind them. So it's quite appropriate for a film that is a comic book.
Absolutely, some great visual effects in that section.
And I actually wonder why it's not used as more in other comic book movies. It's very strange.
Yeah.
Like that.
It's very stylized.
It is. It is. But people adopt styles all the time.
People adopt styles. Yeah. I mean, I would say that is very reminiscent to The Matrix, when the gunshots and the bullets come out and they leave that trail. Mm-hmm. So with the Wachowskis being involved in this film, it's and I think you picked up on some similarities of V standing in entrances. That were reminiscent of The Matrix.
There were some shots that were like very Matrix shots. It was dope.
So moving on to another of the technical aspects of the film. I am no expert in score and soundtrack, generally speaking. It does take me a few times to listen to it, but I have seen this film a thousand times. It is one of my favorite comic book films, so I've become a bit more aware of the soundtrack. The soundtrack and score is very understated as far as I'm concerned during the main body of the film. It's not a score that I would go out and readily purchase and listen to frequently. However, the use of classical music is very rousing and powerful, especially in the opening and closing scenes of the film, which is Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture. Truly incredible and triumphant and celebratory, and that is kind of the moral of the film. It's the celebration of the overthrow of this tyrannical regime. Adrienne, what did you feel about the score and the soundtrack of this film?
I loved that it wasn't boring. It kept surprising me, and that's what I loved about it. I loved that I never knew what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that it took these different turns with, the song played in the jukebox, and then the overture that was broadcast, and then all of it. Yes, it kept surprising me.
Lupe, you are our resident score and soundtrack expert. Give us your thoughts on the work done by Dario Marianelli.
I think it was fantastic. It's not one of the top tier God level musical scores, but it was very rousing. It's very memorable, very emotional, very heroic. There is some melancholic tones to it as well. It definitely stirs your innards, so to speak. And it's something that I would probably listen to again. I'm not gonna rush out to buy the score or listen to it on Spotify, but I think Dario Marianelli did a fantastic job with its composition.
So I think we should now go on to some of the themes of the film. This film is packed with themes. It is
to the gills.
Yeah. So we're going to look at things like politics, religion, the role of media, literature, loads and loads and loads of different themes. So I think one of the most prominent themes in the film is the role of media in politics, especially in far-right regimes. We see a film where the media, the police, and the government are all basically in the same room. Usually in our democracies, we like to think that media is there to hold government to account. We're seeing a lot less of that these days with access and the competition of new media with mainstream media filling our airwaves. Everyone's fighting for the crumbs. Anything they can get is they'll make news out of. And what we then see is real news being a premium. And I think even today, our politicians know that. They have preferred media outlets. They will provide news to particular media corporations or journalists that favor them. And it eventually becomes a symbiotic relationship. And you see that in the film with the British television network, which is basically a riff off the BBC, doing the bidding of the Chancellor. So when the Chancellor says that he wants everyone to remember how bad it was before us, then the media comes out with all of the terrible news stories about, the Civil War in America and all the avian flu epidemics and all of these things and it gets into the psyche of the population and it governs them with fear. I think we are seeing a lot of that today, maybe not to the same extreme, but you're seeing, especially in American politics and to a lesser extent, but still definitely there in British politics, you have politicians like, for example, and not to be partisan, because I'll attack both sides on this thing, you will have channels like Fox News that will support politicians like Donald Trump or other right-wing politicians to the hilt, like they can do no wrong. But then conversely, you will get on the other side like MSNBC or even CNN that will pick their own particular favorite politician, and everything the other person does is a travesty, is a disgrace, is criminal. In the film, the politicians dictate the narrative. That similarity exists in real life. So if, for example, our news stations, our news programs are financed by large companies, the monetization of the news results in politicians who are the favorite of a particular organization or the CEOs of a particular organization. They will request that the news supports that candidate or that individual or that party. So you still, again, you get the influence of politicians on particular news channels. And we see that in the UK as well. I mean, you have the BBC, which is supposed to be a national independent broadcaster, which is funded by the public through a form of a tax, supposed to be impartial. But what we've been seeing lately is a particular bias towards whoever is in government. That's because they know what side their bread is being buttered on. So and it's all about access and things like that. So there's a big lesson there from the film, and it's quite shocking that this alternative future that Alan Moore described as a warning all those years ago has become a kind of a foreshadowing. Other examples, rather funny ones actually, in the film opens up with a character on television spouting his views about how terrible Muslims are, how terrible gay people are, how terrible minorities are, and refugees, and all of this stuff. And it is eerily similar to characters like Alex Jones from InfoWars and other far right personalities. I mean, you can even talk about characters like Shapiro and people like that. And the character then blames the woes of the USA on godlessness, and you get these kind of ideas of a religious extremism and trying to scare the population into behaving because they will be judged by God. you get this anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, anti-gay rhetoric, and these groups are mentioned in the same breath as terrorists in his dialogue. And this is very similar to what we see from characters like Alex Jones. So Adrienne, what do you feel about the parallels that I draw there?
Well, I just wanted to point out that I think that the film showed really well, you know, the families and the people that were watching the television. Like, if you cannot 100% trust the media because of biases and allegiances and that sort of thing, then it's each individual person's responsibility to be informed and to you know, to read between the lines and to know where they're getting their information from. But when every time you see the people watching television, they're all sitting there captivated as though they're not really thinking. They're just absorbing everything and taking what's given to them. And you never ever see anybody discussing anything or thinking about it. They're just sort of going along with it and absorbing it. And
definitely. And there's actually a line in the film of when the people don't trust their governments, they trust their news, or they trust their media, or something like that. And that's definitely true, except for one particular point towards the end of the film, where in the pub they were showing this bird flu epidemic, I think, avian flu epidemic, and one of the patrons of the pub turns around to another patron and says, "Can you believe this shit?" It's a poignant moment because it's at that point where they're in the lead up to the final countdown towards November the 5th. Lupe, is there anything that you think about these parallels that I've drawn?
No, I think you did a good job. It's one thing that's great about stories from good writers, especially ones that have powerful political messaging or actually have something of substance to say, is that they're timeless. So Alan Moore's book, while it was written in the early 80s,
yeah,
and was as a reaction to Margaret Thatcher's conservative and very oppressive regime, it's something that reverberates through history, past, present, and will in the future. And the film did a really good job of making it contemporary.
Yeah.
Introducing elements that were prescient and were of paramount concern to us. You know, stuff like what we went through with 9/11 and, you know, terrorism and all these modern concerns. It was no longer nuclear war. That's not really what we are worried about like they were in the 80s.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a fantastic job. So the parallels you draw are quite correct.
And that was one of the differences between the graphic novel and the film. The graphic novel uses a nuclear disaster and the fallout of that to be the trigger of people's fear. I think the film does a great job. It talks about a particular viral epidemic, but there are lines in there about the destruction of buildings, and considering that this film came out in 2005, just a few years after the attack in New York, I thought it was a very brave choice and decision by Warner Brothers to make that film in that time, and from the filmmakers to participate in such a film. It's a time that studios used to be brave, and we could do with a bit more of that these days. There's a big religious theme in this film as well. There is continual references to Christianic religions. So, for example, from the Old Testament, in Exodus, God was going to kill the firstborn son of of every family that didn't put a mark on the door. It was the Jews trying to escape persecution in Egypt. And we see that parallel in V for Vendetta with V telling the leader of the party that if he agreed to the plan to bring the chancellor to be executed, he should put a mark on his door and he would escape persecution from V himself. Another one is the fascist regime's insignia is basically a cross-like symbol. It's a red vertical line, but instead of one horizontal line making a cross, there's two horizontal lines, but still very cross-like, again, wading into that religious symbolism. And one that was mentioned earlier, extremely powerful, probably the most powerful moment in the film, as far as I'm concerned, is when Evie is in the rain and she says she sees God in the rain, or God is in the rain. She comes out to the front of this building on the roof, arms raised in the air, exactly the same way as how V came out of the burning building with his arms in the air. For me, this is the moment where V became V and Evie became Evie. They were both baptized, and in religions, people are baptized with fire and water, and that was incredibly powerful symbolism, that they had been both baptized into their new roles, their new lives, their new characters, one with fire, one with water, but both arms outspread, accepting their new future. And that was another one. I'm sure there's lots more religious symbolism in there. I don't know if any of you two picked them up. Adrienne, was there anything in there? And if not, what did you think about these items that I've picked up?
Yeah, I guess I can talk about what the first thing that impressed me, but on a rewatch, I would have to go back and look at more of the religious symbolism. But I did notice sort of the red double cross of the regime. I did notice that.
Yeah. And a lot of fascist regimes through history have used religious looking symbolism. And even if you look at the Nazi swastika, it's basically a cross with some extra sticky out bits.
And also it's an Indian mythological symbol. Mm-hmm. It's an Indian religious symbol that they co-opted.
Oh, the swastika.
Yeah, the swastika.
So they actually basically just took it completely.
Yeah, and they basically ruined it for everyone.
There you go. So not even Christianity. It's poor guys have lost their whole culture. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just run through the themes that I picked up watching the film, and I'll do it quickly. I picked up on a lot of things. As you said, this film is very dense,
stacked,
and we can go for hours, but I'll be very, very quick with things that I observed. So the first thing I'll talk about is that charismatic leaders on both sides. Okay, and this is something that we see in terms of political movements. If you think of people like Obama, if you think of people like Donald Trump, if you think of people like Adolf Hitler.
Well, in the UK, you have Jeremy Corbyn on the left and you have Boris Johnson on the right.
Right, exactly. So this movie, Alan Moore was showing us that, a lot of these movements are helmed by charismatic leaders. So on the fascist side, you have the High Chancellor with his, very powerful, high-pitched, forceful voice, very akin to Adolf Hitler. And V himself is a very charismatic figure. It's not just something that's like on the right, same thing on the left. It's very charismatic, very romantic, he has a very attractive personality to him. So I thought that was interesting.
And they both actually the messages they deliver are quite actually similar.
Yeah.
We have saved you from this
from
oppression
yeah.
of viral disease, of a virus, biological disease. And V on the other side is saying, I want to save people from this tyrannical regime. So they're both spouting freedom. But yeah, this.
Yeah.
this
and
film.
then also iconography on both sides. The power of iconography, the power of symbols. There is something very primal about human beings and symbols. We've always used them to communicate ideas that are bigger than us.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, for V, his symbol of V with the circle around it. We could see that there was a kid that was spraying graffiti of it when the fireworks went up. There was V when he the number
on his door was the Roman numeral 5, and that's probably where he got it from.
He got it from somewhere very simple and something coincidental. He probably went crazy, and just the V was just stuck in his mind. He'd lost who he was as a person and just adopted that red letter, and it became something bigger than him, and even more massive than he is as an entity. And even his mask as well is very iconographic, and it has actually bled into real life. You can see a lot of times where there are popular uprisings and mass protests, people wear the mask.
And even the popular uprising in this film, everyone adopts V's mask, and that's I think that was the core concept of the film is about. It's not about the person; it's about the idea.
And iconography is very important for transmitting ideas.
So, can I chip in with one more? So, I'm a social scientist, and culture is made up of particular things, and those things are values, which is at the core of culture. But another one of the components of culture is actually symbols. So every culture has its own specific symbols. So I think that's just what to add on to what you.
Brilliant. I also thought it was very interesting how some of his ideas relate to things that Karl Marx, espoused in terms of inequality of power. Any system that has inequality of power will always lead to some sort of unrest or dissatisfaction. And the more the power differential, increases, the more satisfaction and unrest there will be. And I think it's really interesting because this year, 2019, there are two films that are like some of the most critically acclaimed films of the year, Joker and Parasite, and both films talk about civil unrest and civil dissatisfaction because of inequality of wealth or inequality of power. So these are very powerful themes that reverberate through time. Then also, I thought it was quite interesting that V was kind of like a madman. He was kind of insane.
Kind of.
Like, yes. But at the same time, the High Chancellor was also kind of insane. There is this sort of hint of insanity that comes with being able to do something so larger than life.
And they both lived underground.
Yeah.
One was in the underground station and one was in the bunker.
Underground bunker. So I thought that was quite interesting, this sort of tinge, this flavor of insanity.
Yeah.
Then I thought it was also interesting and purposeful that the council constituted of white old men. And that has been like sort of like a symbol of power in the world, just because of the history and just the way things have gone, period. And I thought it was very interesting that they were brave enough, that Alan Moore was brave enough, and the filmmakers were brave enough to make sure that the council, had those figures, that demographic. Then also, they used the terrorist label a lot.
Oh yeah,
a whole lot, and it's very, very controversial because there is this thing of one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And we see it in our society a lot, people labeled as terrorists to delegitimize what they're fighting against. But at the same time, it was quite interesting because V was a person who used violence.
He used a suicide bomb as well.
He used the threat of a suicide bomb as well. Vest. He also killed officers of the law. So it was quite interesting, and that what I love about Alan Moore's writing, and you can see in Watchmen as well, is that he doesn't shy from the complexities of the real world. Like, these things are not like black and white, as people like seeing, in like fairy tales. I know that Adrienne will like it when I say fairy tales. but I do appreciate the fact that there's this complexity. There's this person that you see as a hero and a freedom fighter, but he's not clean. He's not doing things in the most pristine way. He can't.
Yeah, he put innocence in the way of gunfire.
Yeah, he put innocence in the way of gunfire. So I thought that that was interesting. Then I thought it was very important that I think a lot of people don't understand fascism and throw the word around, and there's a huge nationalist component to fascist ideology, and with everything that we're saying of England will prevail, and that was very, very nationalist. I thought that was very, very smart.
God bless America, by the way.
God bless America. But then also there was I thought it was quite interesting how the story of V, if you look at it in real life, it's been co-opted by both sides of the political aisle. There are conservatives who would take the elements of big government, because conservatives are against, like, they talk about tyrannical governments, and they would take those elements from here. But then also liberals take the elements of how fascist governments can be anti-immigration, discriminate against people based on their sexual preference or sexual identity, and racist, that sort of thing. So I thought it was really interesting, because in these times in which our politics is very partisan, everybody's on one side and everybody on the other side is completely wrong, and the people on the other side think that the people on your side are completely wrong. It's interesting to see how both sides are taken from a piece of literature. And I think that goes to show how good Alan Moore is at telling the complexity of human life, Then also, V, in his bunker, he hid arts and books. And we had a little discussion about this. We had this question: why is it important for art and books to symbolize this sort of rebellion against tyrannical regimes?
Well, one of the things I wanted to say that piggyback on what you said about the similarities between the Chancellor and V, because V would, I would complain that the regime with the unity through strength, and how is that? Strength through unity through faith. And the way that the government regime does that is through tyranny and control, right? So for them, the ends justify the means, but then it's the same with V. V also believes that his ends justify his means. So they're both, they're both playing on that side of the philosophical question. And then as far as the library and the books and the art, that's the culture, that's the artist, that's the free speech, that's what the government is censoring. It's controlling what people think and see, and is wrong.
And through history we see that in whatever wars take place, and then we can go back into ancient Rome and ancient Greece, any country that overthrows another country, or any army that overthrows another army, the first thing they'll do is they'll go into their libraries and destroy their culture. And I think, Truth, you're going to talk about some literary themes from the film.
Yeah, I was I was so struck while watching it of how reminded I was of Beauty and the Beast and Phantom of the Opera. There's so many parallels between you have a masked, caped man who has a secret or forbidden lair, right? And they run across a young woman in the story, and one of the things early on, I kind of don't want to give everything away because I'd love for everybody to see those other films and stories and to kind of discover things on their own. But just to sort of back up what I'm saying, in Beauty and the Beast, Beast saves Belle from a pack of wolves. And in the very beginning of V for Vendetta, V saves Evie from those fingermen curfew guys that were going to assault her. So for all intents and purposes, and why I love fairy tales is because I see these patterns over and over again. So that's one. A girl gets saved from wolves. Another one was the sort of the romance between the characters. You have the same thing, and there's of course different nuances in the way that it all plays out, but there's still a music, dance. They talk about their romance. There's a kiss, and I do sort of see V for Vendetta more as a subversion of the fairy tale, but it still is a pattern. In
another Beauty of the Beast reference. Now that you mentioned it, did you notice the bell jar in V's lair, where there's a scene where he's just sat there, and when she wakes up, she comes into the room and she sees V sitting facing a bell jar, like the bell jar from Beauty and the Beast. And there's a lot of roses in this film. Now, I don't think there's a rose in the bell jar. I can't actually quite make out what it is, but it kind of looks like a log, or a flowerless stem or something like that. I don't know if you picked up on that.
Well, yeah, and there's definitely something about the rose with the the blossom and the thorns. There's something that's repeated in all three of those stories. And then in Beauty and the Beast, Beast gives Belle his library. In Phantom of the Opera, Phantom writes Christine an opera, and V leaves all of his art treasures and books to Evie.
A lot of the art we know from the film was destroyed by the regime, wasn't it? And Stephen Fry's character had a lot of art, and he actually had the Quran, and he had some posters of the Chancellor looking in a compromised position. And also he had his he also had his own sexual preferences on the wall.
And we were asking a question about why art and books are very important, and I wrote something down because I was thinking about it. It's that art is an expression of creativity and boundlessness of the mind and of the soul. And these regimes are about control. Art is anti-control. It's anti-establishment.
It's freedom.
It's freedom.
Freedom of expression.
And books are knowledge, and knowledge is power. And these regimes want to keep people powerless so that they can control them. So that's the significance of having art and books, being outlawed.
Just analyzing the character of V along with the Beast and Phantom, with V being sort of both victim and villain, you see those elements in the other characters as well.
Also, I think just overtly, in case anyone hadn't picked up on it, V is physically scarred. That's why he wears a mask. Yeah. So he is literally a beast, ugly, a monster, a monstrosity. And Evie, she is a beautiful young girl. So just in case it wasn't obvious to anybody, say like Beauty and the Beast.
Yes, definitely.
So I'll just go through a couple more. So one thing I thought was really cool was I'm a big fan of Alan Moore's work. Watchmen is like my favorite book. I can say it at this point. And there are some recurring literary devices and storytelling techniques that I can see from V for Vendetta that echo in Watchmen. And there are also some from DC Comics. So in this film, V loves the movie The Count of Monte Cristo.
Alexandre Dumas.
So within the film, he watches it, and the film within the film makes a comment on this film. And it's akin to Watchmen, how there's a comic within the comic, and the comic in Watchmen makes a commentary on the comic. So the lesson to be learned from Count of Monte Cristo that applies to V for Vendetta is that the protagonist in Count of Monte Cristo cared more about revenge than he did the lady in it, forgetting characters' names. But in V for Vendetta, he ends up, torturing her. He ends up abusing her. He radicalizes her. And in a way, he was blinded by his quests for vengeance and to overturn this regime. And I thought that was like really cool. And it's something that echoes in Watchmen.
More of an inversion or subversion of the fairy tale.
Yeah. And Alan Moore does.
Their love song was, I think it's Julie London, is Cry Me a River. Not A Tale as Old as Time. It's Cry Me a River.
Yeah, it's really powerful stuff, because like in Watchmen, it's a similar thing where the sailor becomes a monster to save his family, which is what Adrienne Veidt does in Watchmen. And it's the same thing that V does. He becomes a monster to save people or to, achieve his cause. And I just thought it was really cool to see that echo through his work. And it's just masterful.
And he even says it, doesn't he?
Yeah.
It says you wear a mask for so long, you begin to forget who you were beneath it.
Yeah.
It's just brilliant writing.
Yeah, and that line of wearing the mask for so long, you begin to forget who you were beneath it, echoes in Watchmen, because Watchmen deals with masks. So I thought that was really cool. And then also this concept of men can fail, but ideas last forever is something that we see Christopher Nolan used in Batman Begins. So I thought that, those are very cool themes that reverberated through.
Absolutely. It's an expertly written film. Another visual storytelling device and part of the symbology of the film is the use of horses and horse statues. I mean, we see the use of horses a lot in Batman v Superman as well, and how they symbolize death or injury. And we see these statues in the layer of V, but also in Stephen Fry's character's kind of basement. If the horse is posed with one leg up front, it means the rider was wounded in battle, and that's kind of a foreshadowing of what might happen to the character or what has happened to the character. And the horse in V's lair was with one leg up, and that kind of indicates to us that this was a character. It's early in the film, so we don't know yet, but it does indicate to us that this is a character that has been injured. And we see later on that through this kind of Holocaust style imprisonment, we see that he was scarred emotionally and physically, especially as well through the fire that he was exiting. And in Stephen Fry's character Dietrich, the horse statue is with two legs up, and that symbolizes death of the rider. And spoiler, soon enough, he ends up dead. So keep an eye out for horses if you're and horse statues if you're in future films.
Anywhere. Not just future films.
Yeah.
If I go to a friend's house and I see a horse statue,
I'm getting the hell out of it. Yeah, so the symbology of the film is brilliant.
One more thing that I thought was really cool was, segueing into this from Dietrich's character. He had a late talk show, and it was a comedy show. And we can see that a lot of comics tend to make fun of regimes that they think are too oppressive. It's kind of like seen as a safe place to criticize oppressive regimes. So you do it with satire, you do it with comedy, but the heart of the criticism is true.
But it wasn't very safe in this regime.
He was not safe in this one at all. And so on his show, he mocks the chancellor. And I thought that was like really interesting, because even for any regime, we saw it done a lot to George Bush. He was dragged over the coals. Oh my God. And we see it done a lot to Donald Trump, to people who are not happy. A lot of late night talk show hosts, they tend to, make fun of him. On Saturday Night Live, they even have characters who dress up as him. So I thought that parallel was really interesting.
I have a thought that maybe I can win Lupe over to my fairy tale land with.
Convert me, radicalize me.
Okay. Well, in Beauty and the Beast, Beast and the kingdom or the people are under a curse, or the people in the castle, whatever, are under a curse. So that's sort of the fairy tale land way, but in V for Vendetta, they're under a political curse.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
So the goal is to lift a political curse.
Look at you. Okay, I like that. That's dope.
Lupe's already running out of the door, going to Blockbuster. Oh no, Blockbuster Video doesn't exist. He's downloading Beauty and the Beast.
That's really insightful. That's really insightful. There's one more thing that I want to say about V being a complex character, not being a saint, being a beast, so to speak, being both monster and hero. What he did to Evie was quite immoral. And it's interesting because a lot of times when people talk about radicalization, they tend to use it as a negative thing against another side of the political spectrum. So people who are conservatives will talk about how people have been radicalized into extreme feminism and SJW-ness and that sort of thing. And then people on the left will talk about how people were radicalized into being alt-rights or, being neo-Nazis or nationalists, that sort of thing. But we can see here that the quote-unquote hero / protagonist, in order to get Evie to be on his side and imbibe his ideology fully, he had to radicalize her, brainwash her. And he did it in a very intrusive, in a violent, in a way that really violated her. So I thought that was another element of the complexity of Alan Moore's writing. And I just think he's so brilliant. And we need more of that these days. We need to see characters as multi-dimensional, not just black and white, not just, he's a hero and he's fighting for good, but he never kills, which is
wake the fuck up.
Exactly. The director once said, wake the F up. You know what I'm saying? We send soldiers to war all the time. I have friends, I have family who went to war. And when they come back, we don't ask them, but we know that they killed people. But, they're not bad people. They're fighting for a cause, whether it's a right cause or a wrong cause, or they don't know. And that's just the complexity of life, And I think in a lot of our mass media, we don't see that. We have storytellers that give us the beautiful lie, so to speak. And I just think it's really brilliant and important to show how complex life is.
This film was in the golden year of comic book movies. 2005, we saw some incredible comic book adaptations. We had Batman Begins, we had V for Vendetta, we had Constantine, we had so many great films come out that year. And I think we have lost our way a bit in recent times.
I wonder why.
Yeah, we need to. Revisiting this film has shown me we need to find ourselves again. We need to get back on track. We need to get back to these stories that we can learn about life, about religion, about culture, about politics, and we shouldn't be afraid of these things.
And not in a washed out, diluted way.
Adrienne, how does this rank amongst comic book movies for you?
Well, it's at the top. It's definitely at the top. I just saw it, and I look forward to watching it again. And I will probably try to do triple features of watching. I would probably watch V for Vendetta first, then Phantom of the Opera, and then I would want to end with the happy ending in Beauty.
Brilliant. That's a sound triple feature. Live action or animated?
That's a good question.
Probably the live action, just
makes
because
sense.
it's newer. But yeah, it has more. It is more complicated. They have added more, and you know, there's the father-daughter dynamic in all of the women's stories. I don't think that I did read that about the comic as far as Evie and her father, but there's a father element there too. So
yeah, even in the film, it's the absence of her father that molds her into the person that she becomes partly as well.
And that's
her father.
The opera, and you know, Belle with her relation with her parents as well. Yeah. There.
That's great. How about you, Lupe? Where do you rank V for Vendetta in your all-time list of comic book movies?
It's top tier. So I have like different categories. I have about 6 comic book movies that I think are 10 out of 10, absolutely perfect masterpieces. Then I have about 7 or so through 12 or 13 that I think are like classics, about a 9 out of 10. Then it goes down to like good and then mediocre and that sort of thing. So this one is in the 7 to 12 range as a classic. Someone I'd say is 9 out of 12. So I'd say my favorite comic book mythology superhero movies of all time be Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, The Dark Knight, Watchmen, Unbreakable, and Joker. Those are all 10 out of 10. Then the 9 out of 10 like classics, near perfect, are Batman Begins, then Captain America, the Winter Soldier, then V for Vendetta, then Logan, then Black Panther. So, yeah, you know, that's sort of like...
I'm glad you were vague about that, Lupe.
I had to be super specific.
I know, I was all like, it's at the top.
I get it.
Yeah, as far as my rankings go, as you have, Man of Steel is my favorite. I have Batman Begins as my second favorite comic movie of all time, followed by Batman v Superman. Then The Dark Knight. I have The Dark Knight Rises high up. And V for Vendetta is my 6th favorite comic book movie of all time. And that's not to say it's better quality than other films like Watchmen and Constantine, which I also have very high up in my list. I think probably, almost definitely, that Watchmen is a better made movie. I pick V for Vendetta as one of my favorites for the same reason that Oliver Stone is one of my favorite directors. It's the material, the subject matter, the political aspect. I adore following politics. I have my personal strong beliefs, and I love seeing those replicated on the big screen. V for Vendetta to me is what I dream about when I think about right-wing governments, especially this Tory one we have in the UK currently. And when I see my ideology put onto the big screen, it warms my heart. So that's why Viva Vendetta will always be one of my favorite comic book movies in general, and I'll always cherish it. Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you guys about this film, one of my favorite films. I think I've made that quite clear. I quite like this film.
I enjoyed it.
Adrienne, why don't you tell people where they can find you?
You can find me at Truth Love Faith on Twitter.
And Lupe?
You can find me at Live Love Lupe. That's if I haven't yet been canceled. It's happening any minute now.
So I'm gonna sign off with who was V? He was Edmond Dantes. He was my father and my mother, my brother, my friend. He was you and me. He was all of us. You can find me at Vinaldo7 on Twitter and Vero. And until next time, stay exiled.